Welcome back to my channel. My name is Melanie Tana. I make videos about different kinds of stories in all different formats and what I learned from them as a writer and sometimes as a person as well. For this video this week, I'll be talking about the Giver Quartet by Lois Lowry, which I finished recently. It's a favorite from my childhood, and I thought it would be cool to every now and then return to something that I've always claimed as a favorite, even though it's been like maybe even 10 years since I've read a book or a series. I wanted to go back to it and like look at why I liked it, what I appreciate about it now as an adult, what's different about it, because I've heard some people talk about having read it and they didn't really love it or whatnot, and I wanted to know how I felt about it. I won't be giving away major spoilers, but you will get sort of an idea of how this ties together, how all four books as companion novels become a series by the end. So I'm going to address each book and talk about some things about it. You won't get major spoilers, but the Giver book has been out for a while, so I'll be talking about that. So starting with book one, I always claimed the Giver as a favorite of mine. I think right off the bat, it's great for middle grade readers who are learning, especially if you're learning about dystopian fiction, because it is dystopian, because a lot of the dystopian books I'm familiar with are either big adult kind of dark depressing book burning stories, and then you have stuff like not even like the Hunger Games and everything surrounding that series. That's more YA and deals a lot with romance and things like that. I think the Giver Quartet in general manages to be address something an adult book could, without a lot of the tropes of YA, which is fine. YA is fine. I want everyone to know I'm not dissing on it, but sometimes I'm not looking for the government revolution teenager stories. Sometimes I really like a soft theme, and I think something that the Giver book addresses with Jonas and with the Giver and his exploration of not just a world of color and a world of music, but a world of feeling and emotion that is lacking in this society. It can ask a very important question to a young person, which is, why are feelings important? What benefit do they bring to society, and also what harm can they often add? Because there's a point that this society exists that they don't even have hills, it's just sameness, and it's all black and white, and then you take all that complexity and nuance of humanity, and you have no love and no important human relationships. I really liked Jonas exploring that with the Giver, who could be like a grandfather type figure, even to the point of Jonas claiming, I wish that if we had real family units, not just, mothers and fathers, but moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas, because he doesn't even understand the concept of a grandma and grandpa. He says, I would want you to be my grandfather. And it's really sweet, and it's also really sad. That he doesn't even know the concept of that to any important degree that's relevant in his life. I think the Giver does just a simple job of highlighting that with knowledge and with understanding of the world comes a lot of weight, and we sort of do pass that on to upcoming generations, expecting them to save us, and then we don't always recognize how heavy what we've given them is and what we could have done for them, and how we've blocked out those feelings and emotions and difficult things ourselves. And I think when it comes to the writing of this story, I found the climax to be more satisfying than some others in the series. I think Jonas having to leave the Giver behind was sad, and I thought it was really powerful of his character, showed his character that he chose to bring Gabe with him because he knew that Gabe, the baby, was going to die. So that is a spoiler, but for the other books I won't go into as much. And then you get to see Jonas in that environment dealing with the consequences of his biggest decision he's ever made. to leave everything he's known and to bring this baby with him when he himself is like 12 or 13. And that's another thing that I won't get into too much because then I'll just rant. I don't like the Giver movie. I think it's bad, objectively. That's just me. I think they tried to make it like other dystopians and futuristic and more sci-fi, and they've got these hovercraft that like are referenced in the book a little bit with their like, I don't know, but like and the whole thing with his friends and the fact that they're not 12-year-old, 13-year-old kids is kind of sad to me. I think you lose a lot of the simplicity of it, and when you make it kind of trendy, when there's like 1,000 other stories like that, and that's not what the original story was doing. It's just not my favorite thing. And I would have preferred to watch a young kid understand what emotions are rather than like a 16-year-old boy. And I still didn't feel like it just wasn't good. And it was a waste of Meryl Streep. Like I love her, but as a character, it wasn't a very important role because there was no bad guy. They made it out to be like there was an intentional bad. But the point of The Giver is that over time, in trying to pursue peace and a lack of chaos, they overcorrected into a world of basically nothing and nothing important and no emotional connection, and everyone is the same and everyone has a role and no one can explore that or change who they are or feel love for other people. Like, that's the point. That's the enemy, is what they've given up. And not this big elder who she's like the top dog and she's trying, you still have some sympathy for her in the movie because she doesn't fully understand, but it's like there was no villain. And if you have to make the villain a person in an adaptation when they're not a person, when it's a concept or an ideology or just the decisions of your ancestors, like, I just think that's bad writing, personally. And I will say I really do like the casting of Jeff Bridges as the Giver, because he's kind of gruff and bitter, and it makes sense. And I just like that actor. I think from the Tron movies probably is why. But I think he was a good choice, and other than that, I really just didn't like that movie. I didn't think it was very good, but that's just me personally. I think they just changed too much, and they didn't get it, It's like you can tell when something might be changed a lot in an adaptation, but you can still grasp the theme and what it means to people, but I feel like they didn't do that in this movie. Going into the second book, Gathering Blue, I loved this book, and I remember reading it in middle school, and I remember, so Kira, the main character, she does embroidery, basically, magical embroidery in a way, and I, at the time, had started learning how to embroider for my grandma. And I still, to this day, really like to do stuff like that. I had a little scrap. I had embroidered a butterfly. And then I read about how Kira has this sort of magical, like, inspired piece of work that she stitched in a moment of, like, the power manifesting through her. And that it comforted her, and so I would keep this little like butterfly that I'd embroidered in my pocket. I wish I had it. It's stored away somewhere. I still have it somewhere. And I would walk around in middle school, and I remember walking into the band room and feeling it in my pocket, being like, it will give me strength. It's just so cute. But that book had an effect on me, and I related to that character. It was such an interesting thing for her to have. I think it could have just been painting. It could have just been a different art form, but I liked that it was this one, that it related to me. As far as the story goes itself, I don't think a lot of people love this one. It is a little slow, but I really like the world. I like the vibe. It gives a medieval village vibe. I can't quite explain it. They basically abandon the weak, and don't take care of each other, and they easily turn on each other, and have abandoned like modern science and stuff. They don't have a lot. It's not as modern a world as the Giver world. And Kira has a disability. One of her legs, as when she was born, just doesn't work very well in her favor, and she uses a cane, a little crutch. And I just like that too. Just the exploration of a disabled character is always nice, and it didn't change her. It just affected her because her society rejects people like her, disabled people, sick people, and people that need just extra help. They don't help each other. They're not very nice to their children. And so she's a standout because her mother was nice to her. And I like the speech of these characters, especially like where the kid Matt is from. His people, like the more poor neighborhood, their speech is very interesting, very well written. I think something Lois Lowry does quite well, and I've read this in other books of hers too. She writes kids pretty well. I think she understands their speech and the things they would or wouldn't say. Sometimes I'll read a book and I'm like, you have never met a child. And I really like middle grade, so I think it's important to me that the kids feel like kids, like real people. And they do in this, as far as I'm concerned, I feel like they do. Kira's, I think, 14? Something like that. And Matt's like a young kid and he's kind of mischievous, but he's learning how to be kind to people and he's thoughtful and clever and quick, and I just find him interesting. Like, he's not trying to hurt anyone, but he's definitely learning from the world around him to be a little less kind, but he stands out because he's kind to Kira. And he'll, like, you know, talk about her leg in a sort of crude way because he just doesn't know any better, but he doesn't necessarily see her as lesser. So it's kind of nice. It's kind of refreshing. So I liked the story. I liked the writing. The world felt a little bit more fantasy to me than anything else, and there's an exploration of like the lies that you've been told, things like that. There's a really powerful scene with someone from Kira's past, and yeah, and I felt like when I was reading, I couldn't really quite remember how it ended. And then when it ended, I felt like there needed to be a little bit more, even just one more scene, sort of with the antagonist character, because Kira is like, I need to help change things. And I don't think you see enough of that. So that's my biggest thing, is that I think with this story, she builds really well, but I felt like the climax was lacking in sort of the oomph of what we needed to actually see happen and the consequence of a final choice and of a major choice in the end. That was just what I was missing, because I often picture adaptations in my mind, especially since I didn't like The Giver. So in my mind, I'm like, well, how would I do an adaptation differently? I'm not a filmmaker, but I love film, you know, and I've always thought like, well, how would I do this? And I always thought it would be a really beautiful movie with Gathering Blue, a really beautiful story visually, and I think a scene that's not even in the book that we're kind of missing, sort of her accepting her power and using it in a certain way that you don't get to actually see happen. And I just think that would be nice, but that's just me personally. I really like that one. But out of all of them, it's like a secret favorite because I like the vibes. But as far as the story goes, it's not my favorite plot line. So that's kind of where I'm at with that one, with Gathering Blue. Going on to Messenger, the third book in the series. This is maybe my favorite. I don't know for sure. I love Matty. He is such a great character. So he's Matt in Gathering Blue, and because he's older and your name changes as you get older, you add syllables, he becomes Matty. And he's this nice teenager who lives with, slight spoiler here, Kira's dad, who is a blind man living in a society of people who, kind of the opposite of Kira's village, are all sort of rejected from their own lands and trying to start a new peaceful life. I feel like I already liked Maddie's character when he was Matt in Gathering Blue, and now as Maddie in Messenger, I really like how he is, how kind he is, how he's also just a teenage boy and he likes a girl. Like, that's kind of the vibe. I like his mission in the story. It feels like his own. It feels like he chose it and accepted it, and you get to see that play out more. The forest surrounding their village is no longer letting people pass through. Every now and then, even just like sometimes for people on their first going through of the forest, they'll receive a warning, like a briar will, you know, stab them or poke them or something, and then they know that they can't come back through. The forest doesn't want them. It's like it's like an entity of darkness. I don't know. It's spooky, and I like spooky stories. And I think this one is handled nicely because there's also the trade master, who comes to this sort of like auction-y type vibe, and people in the village are trading things for stuff. They're trading aspects of themselves for random things. And Maddie doesn't quite realize that that's what's happening. But the best example is the school teacher is trading parts of himself to get a woman to like him, and he becomes a harsh, unkind person, very unlike himself. And I just think there's, like, that theme is very present there, and also very, it's just kind of eerie, something about it. And with the forest coming into play, it's definitely connected. And Matt's mission becomes to bring Kira from her village to her father's village so that they can live together before the forest closes up entirely, and more importantly, before the villagers don't let anyone in to their village, because they are starting to lose their goodness from the trades and they want to block people out. It's sad, and you can't expect a peaceful, kind society to work that way forever. People start to get selfish and they start to worry about their own survival and their resources. And that's what happens here in this story, and it's sad, but I think realistic and handled well, especially when you're watching the perspective of a teenager who's learning sort of where he stands and what he believes and what his peers believe and how they see this change that's being made in these decisions. So I think it's really interesting. And I think that the threat of the forest and of this, like, sort of harsh, almost intentionally violent presence is established well. So you feel that threat and you kind of feel it looming and growing, especially as people are trading away themselves. That parallel is really interesting. I think the blind man's called the seer. Like, they get a title, and Maddie really wants his title to be messenger. And if you read the book, you'll see kind of where that goes, because Maddie has a particular relationship with the forest where it hasn't rejected him yet, and he's passed through many times bringing messages to people. And then he starts to realize it doesn't like him anymore, but he has to bring Kara back. And so, I don't know, there's just something about this story that I find powerful, and Lois Lowry doesn't really pull punches with this kid. Like, he goes through it, and I just like this one. I don't know. Again, the spooky vibes are handled well. The trade master is like this sort of unknown, distant being that just comes and visits as he wills to get stuff from people. He takes who they are, and it's definitely a soft magic vibe, and that's my vibe. I love soft magic and soft sci-fi. I think it makes way for themes and ideologies that don't have to be explained, and therefore we get this stuff that's kind of creepy but awesome and, like, interesting. Anyway, going on to book 4, Son, as in, like, son or daughter, son. This story follows a character named Claire, and she is the birth mother from Jonas's original village, who gave birth to Gabe, the baby that Jonas takes away at the end of The Giver. And her process is very interesting. So she basically has a C-section. She fails as a birth mother. She gives birth to a healthy baby. But unfortunately, he doesn't sleep well at night, and apparently that's enough to like, he's not worth taking care of, is ultimately what they decide. And she has to watch other people take care of him from afar. So she fails as a birth mother. She will no longer be doing that. She goes straight into working at a fish hatchery. And they forget a very important thing in their society, to give her pills to block her ultimately to block her hormones and her emotions. It's just a blocker in general to make you sort of more functional and therefore, like, not attached. So she's attached to her son, and she tries to see him, and it's sad. But in the event that Gabe is taken away, she doesn't know what to do, so she runs away because she's distraught, and that was her baby. And she heard that this baby was going to be released, and so it's just a whole thing. And she ends up at a village where she's lost her memory, and she has to regain it. And there's this whole long, like, process of her remembering she has a son and fighting to find him. And it takes her, like, almost a decade of physical training to climb this whole cliff to reach her son. And I like this story a lot. This one is longer and just really powerful. As you know, I personally want to be a mom That's something I'm looking forward to one day in my future, and I appreciated the perspective of a person whose child was taken from them, and how none of the other people in the village that she grew up in even know what that is, that feeling of connection to a baby or to another person. They don't know what love is, and they think she's weird for trying to understand it, because she doesn't understand it, because no one can explain it to her, but she loves her baby. She feels that, you know. I think the character, what she goes through is awesome, and like the middle toward the end of the book is really cool. That she gets to her, you know, she's trying to get to her son, that she even has to face the trade master to get to the village. And he, if you don't trade with him, is a violent man. It's like kind of scary. He kind of freaks me out a little bit. And when I imagine an adaptation, like, he's got real yucky vibes. Like, he does not make you feel good inside. He's basically the embodiment of evil, and he takes the best parts of you to give you something you want. And sometimes it's a valid thing to want, and other times, at what cost, you know? So, there's sort of an end to this story where Gabe becomes the main character, her son. And I think he's like 14, 15? Yeah, he's around that age, when he has an opportunity to help people. And I liked this perspective change to Gabe after what Claire decides to trade to be in her son's village to see him. My only gripe is just that sometimes I feel like the characters didn't always make a decision because they wanted to. And with Gabe, that's the best example of, I felt like Maddie, his mission, his goal, like, he knew it was important, but he still was being told kind of what to do with it. And I think it would have been a little bit more powerful if it was even more his decision, but that I still think was handled better. With Gabe, with this, like, thing he does and goes to do, I feel like it would have been more powerful if an adult had told him, no, you can't do that, you're a kid. And Gabe had said, you can't tell me what to do, I'm gonna go save people. That would have been more powerful than being told, like, Gabe, you have to do this. Like, this is your, like, torch to carry. And, like, while that is a powerful message, that sometimes it is the kids, it is the next generation who will save us from our own mistakes, I think that the child in this scenario, in this metaphor, needed to figure that out himself and not be told that. Even if the adults knew it, they could try to deny it, because I think that's the best course of action for an adult protecting a child, is to keep them from danger, even if you know at some point they're going to have to face it. You know, that's just more accurate to me, and I think healthier. I think you should protect kids, especially, like, he's not some 18-year-old boy, you know, he's 14. There's a difference there, and he has a lot of innocence left, and he needs to be protected. And I think it would have been cooler to me if he had made that journey of his own volition entirely. But that's sort of me, and that's why this is like a soft spoiler video, because I can't not talk about it, but I also don't want to explain exactly what it is, because I want people to read it for themselves. But I think that was my takeaways, just that some endings were a little bit softer, and I think could have been fine-tuned a little bit more. And I don't usually like to critique stuff. I don't feel like a reviewer. I like to talk about what I learned. But what I did learn about this is that I think when it comes to these types of decisions characters make, I think it's more powerful if they make them for themselves. No one's telling them that this is your destiny or you should be doing this. Especially if they're a kid. Kids can figure it out. And I know she knows that, Lois Lowry. And she's one of my favorite authors still. Especially after rereading this. I still find a lot of value in this story. But that's just sort of the perspective I have on it and how I would want to approach it. I really love this quartet, though. Overall, I loved the reread. I loved the Trade Master. I thought that he was a cool, subtle villain, and made sense that he would have always been in the background of things. He was sort of just this, like, concept of a person, a powerful entity personified, and I think that's kind of cool. I love simple explorations of themes, like I said. I love a boring book because we kind of get to slow down and explore those relationships and nice conversations and stuff. And I think where other people might be bored in these books, I really like the interpersonal connections and stuff. So I also think this is a nice break from the more like hard magic system fantasy that I've been reading, or just the high fantasy I've been reading. I've been going through the Wheel of Time and I love it. I really do enjoy it, but it is a lot sometimes, so to read something a little more simple was nice. And that's my overall, like, what I learned sort of overview of these books. I do recommend them to people. I especially recommend them to younger people, middle grade age readers and a little older. Because, yeah, it's important to ask these questions. It's important to explore these themes. And it sort of gives a good, softer dystopian that's not like 1984. So that's kind of my perspective. And I will get back to you guys with more what I learned type videos, and I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, thanks for sticking around if you have until the end. I will see you next time with another video.